With the topic of Christian moral action, there's not an awful lot of boxes or ways to separate it because there's just clear themes throughout. So the boxes are nice and large, you've got plenty of space. There's not an awful lot of slides to this PowerPoint. However, the slides that you do have are very, very important. So the first box is for where Bonhoeffer came into the war in the first place. So obviously Bonhoeffer did go up against Hitler. So please do write the question at the top. What should a Christian do when a key part of their faith is undermined by the law? Because this is the problem that Bonhoeffer faced. What does he do when his faith goes against what the law of the land is telling them? And so this is the situation that faced German Lutheran pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer when he lived in a National Socialist state. National Socialist meaning Nazi state, Nazi-led or Nazi-headed state run by Hitler. Bonhoeffer was a key founding member of the Confessing Church, a religious community in Funkelwald, which, again, apologies for any pronunciations here, which they promoted this idea of rejecting the Nazi ideology. And so Bonhoeffer was a founding member of the Confessing Church. The Confessing Church is still a Christian denomination, it's still a Christian church, but they wanted to move away from the rest of the Christian community, as you'll find out on the next slide. The first thing they wanted to do was to reject the way that the German Christian church supported some of the Nazi ideology. The second thing that they wanted to promote or advocate was the value behind the church community, the ethic responsibility for others, and finally this idea of discipleship. Discipleship is so important to Bonhoeffer. Discipleship, and with that comes sacrifice and suffering. And so there were four main reasons why the Confessing Church was established. They wanted to move away from the Nazi ideology. They wanted to move away from the German Christian church that was supporting the Nazi ideology. That's all that goes in the first top box. The first 4 slides for this PowerPoint are setting the scene as to why Bonhoeffer got involved. And then the other side of the sheet is Bonhoeffer's main teachings, which is what the structure of your essays will be. So this is setting the scene. So that not necessarily that you'll get a question on these areas, but you don't understand his discipleship or his solidarity until you understand these parts of it as well. So, box underneath, again, nice large box. The German Christian church then, what were they doing that Bonhoeffer really did not agree with? Some Christians joined the party, that's the Nazi party, and incorporated the ideology of Nazism into their Christian beliefs. This led to the split in the German Protestant churches. The Protestant churches obviously started and established by Luther and in the Reformation. So you have the German Christian churches that were Protestant, and you have a split that comes about because the church is supporting Nazi ideology, and Bonhoeffer, with a few others, did not agree with this. And so in 1934, they split away from the German Protestant churches leading to Christians in a Nazi-controlled German church versus the Confessing Church. The Confessing Church, which sought to be authentically Christian. Nazi ideology gained strong influence and control over the church. Hitler himself was seen as the leader of the Christianity alongside Jesus. Well, of course he did. Of course he was going to put himself alongside Jesus. Why did Hitler want to have influence over the church? Because the church was so powerful. The church has always been powerful. And so people that want power want to have some leading control over the church. And therefore, Hitler wanted to have his ideology involved with the church teachings. And the church went along with this. Some leaders of the German Christians began to wear brown uniforms linking them to the National Socialism or the Nazi Party. So they even visibly associate themselves with the Nazis by wearing brown. They also did not allow any ministers with Jewish ancestry. So they stopped anybody with any Jewish link, any Jewish blood, from becoming ministers, priests, etc. They also campaigned to remove the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Why? Because they were the Jewish scripture. However, anybody that knows their Bible or Jesus' background would see a very, very big issue with all of this. With Hitler associating himself alongside Jesus, with Hitler being seen as the leader of Christianity. Can anybody see what that massive issue might be? Bethany? Jesus was Jewish, exactly. Jesus was a Jew. So the massive issue here with the church supporting Nazi ideology and campaigning to remove from the Old Testament the first 5 books, those 5 books were supported and believed by Jesus. Yes, Jesus wanted to develop them and add to them, but still the massive issue there was Jesus was Jewish. Excellent. Large box underneath. The German Christians then versus Bonhoeffer. What did he actually do? Bonhoeffer was ordained in 1931 and with a group of young reformers tried to change what was happening in Germany. He accused German Christians of not confessing their faith, hence the confessing church, not being true to their discipleship, disciples of Christ, 12 disciples, following the commands of God, and therefore the confessing church rejected the anti-Jewish rules and the Nazi influence over the church. Bonhoeffer openly spoke against the Nazi persecution of Jews, causing conflict with the Nazi state. What you have to be aware of in this context was Bonhoeffer was in his early 30s when he died, or when he was finally executed in one of the extermination camps. We're talking about a young man here going against Hitler. This was massive. He was certainly practicing what he preached. This was a very, very brave man. Very brave, very intelligent, taking huge risks. But because he believed that the German Christian church was not doing the right thing, because he believed so strongly in his faith in God, his discipleship, God's grace, etc., that he then openly spoke out against the Nazis, and Hitler knew about him. This was not something that Hitler wasn't aware of. Hitler knew about Bonhoeffer. He knew what Bonhoeffer was doing. Hence why he eventually captured him and executed him. final box on this side. Preaching the message, then in 1935, the leaders of the Confessing Church asked Bonhoeffer to lead and direct a secret and illegal seminary. A seminary was a place to train new pastors. The seminary closed in 1937 by the Gestapo. Bonhoeffer described his time at the seminary as experiencing community and as a place for spiritually damaged and a refuge for the persecuted. And so they had seminaries, they had secret meetings to train pastors within the Confessing Church. This was then found out by the Nazis and shut down by the Gestapo. It was a source of spiritual discipline, a life of prayer, and a way to provide a caring service of the church, a sign and expression of Christ being present in the community. This, Bonhoeffer came to see, was what was meant to live under the word of God. That's all that goes into that final box. When you're happy, do turn over your sheets. So once again, Bonhoeffer was extremely active in making the message clear, the message that you need God's grace, you need to suffer, you need to sacrifice, you need that discipleship. If anyone has any questions or problems, do ask. The next side of the sheet is very, very important. The next side of the sheet is where we look at the four main parts of Bonhoeffer's argument. So the first is going to be discipleship, then obedience, then grace, then solidarity. These are the four parts you might get specifically asked in your exam. All four parts go together, however. So all of this interchanges. So even if you get a question on grace, you need to mention the others. Even if you get a question on discipleship, you mention the others. All right, so discipleship. For Bonhoeffer, the call to discipleship entails exclusive obedience to the leadership of Jesus and the will of God, placing it above the law and any human leadership. So what he's immediately saying there is, ignore the law of the land, ignore the human leadership, the politicians, the people that make the laws, etc., and go straight to Jesus and the will of God. And this needs exclusive and complete obedience to Jesus and God. This entails cutting yourself off from your previous existence, not just fitting it into your new life where convenient. This is a very, very important point. The bits are underlined just to help you recall them. Discipleship is not about, oh, I'm a Christian and it's convenient. This isn't about just slipping it into your normal life. This is about a whole life overhaul. This is about changing your life completely and cutting yourself off from everything in your previous existence. This is about dedicating your life to God. So Bonhoeffer then talks about this idea of an act of obedience is the only real faith. And it calls and demands action. No time to think things through. You must simply act. This isn't a think about it. What should I do? Ponder over it and then act. No, this is a you act and then think afterwards. And this actually comes very clear in the final slide of solidarity. When Bonhoeffer left Germany, escaped to America, and then went back to Germany, and then was captured and put into an extermination camp. And he acted without thinking because of this discipleship, because of this demand to act. And this is a very powerful argument. For me, Bonhoeffer is not like many others that just say, oh, you should do this and you should do that. They don't practice what they preach. He practices what he preaches, and he wants action. He's not just saying, oh, be a good person. He's talking about actual action here. Single-minded obedience is what Bonhoeffer called for. Just as Jesus called Peter to risk his life and walk on the sea. Single-minded meaning blinkered, meaning one-track mind. You must obey Jesus. How it links to Peter, Jesus asked Peter to walk on the water towards him. And Peter went, no, I can't, I'll sink. And Jesus says, get out of the boat and walk towards me. And so Peter starts to get out of the boat and he starts to sink. And he's saying, I'm sinking. And Christ says, have faith in me. And when Peter has faith in Jesus, he can walk on the water back to Christ and back to safety. And so it's having this faith in Jesus, having this single-minded obedience to do exactly what Jesus tells you. Reason, conscience, responsibility, piety are all stand in the way to obedience. You need to turn everything off. Turn off your reason, turn off your conscience, everything. You just follow Jesus. Easier said than done, one would think. Suffering and sacrifice are inherent to discipleship for anyone who follows Jesus, because they must pick up the cross and follow the path of suffering that Jesus walks. This is absolutely key to discipleship. You have to suffer like Christ did. You have to sacrifice like Christ did. He's not asking you all to die, to martyr yourself like he eventually did do. He's not asking for that sort of sacrifice, but he's still saying you need to sacrifice yourself for the message. Even spiritually sacrifice yourself, not just, life. So the bits that are underlined are just to help you recall the main important parts of this. You could get a whole question in your exam on discipleship. That doesn't mean, therefore, you only have one slide to talk about. You have to incorporate this within the other side of the sheet that does the background, and then also link it into what is obedience, what is solidarity, etc. Box underneath is for obedience. Bonhoeffer spoke out against the Nazi ideals in the university he worked. He lost his job. Public lectures, they were banned. Illegal seminaries, they were shut down by the Gestapo. And so he continued to push against Hitler. He continued in his ways against Hitler right up to the point in 1945 where they were plotting to assassinate Hitler. But obviously we know in 1945 the war did come to an end. But they were looking towards trying to assassinate Hitler. Yes, it does seem to go against some of the Christian messages. Do not murder. But then again, the most loving thing to do, the agape love, the justice and mercy, would be, they believe, to assassinate Hitler. Who was the Antichrist? At the end of the day, he associated himself with Christ. He said he was the head of Christianity like Christ. And so it was believed that Bonhoeffer did join the plot to assassinate him. He said that one must break the Christian teachings of obeying civil authority, justifying civil disobedience because of his emphasis on obedience to God rather than duty to the state. This is massive. What this is saying is in the Bible it says you should obey the people in charge, the people in authority in your country, because they would never have been elected without God's permission or God's grace. And so the Bible actually argues and teaches that you should follow what the people in society, your politicians and your queen or your king, what they argue, because they have been elected there and chosen by God. However, what Bonhoeffer is arguing is no. Sometimes you need to be disobedient. Sometimes you need to push back against this system. However, in an age of terrorism and extremism, this feels like a very dangerous idea. What Bonhoeffer is arguing is civil disobedience is fine. Going against the laws of the land, the people in charge is fine. Causing mayhem and disruption is fine when you have single-minded obedience to faith. But when this is what terrorists are using as an excuse for their actions, and when extremism is such a big problem now, it seems like a very dangerous idea. How would we view those that choose to disobey the British government because its laws go against the holy law of their religion? Does anybody know which Stephen Fry quote this links to? Excellent. One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. What Bonhoeffer is arguing there is about fighting for freedom. One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. Yes, we know that what Bonhoeffer was doing was right, but that's because we appreciate his actions. Still very risky and a very dangerous ideology. Second to last box is going to be on God's grace. The last one is solidarity. Excellent. God's grace then. The part at the top of the box is for the top part of the slide. Cheap grace is for the first of the large boxes. Costly grace is for the second. So basically this slide is split out like your boxes. God's love and mercy given freely to people, including the forgiveness of sins and the offer of eternal life. God's grace is not offered as a reward. It's not earned. You cannot earn God's grace. It's given to you as a gift if God's grace shines upon you. And so you have cheap grace. That goes in, as I said, the large of the two boxes. Cheap grace is the deadly enemy of the church. We are fighting today for costly grace. Cheap grace means grace sold on the market like cheap Jack wares. This is in The Cost of Discipleship, his book. Cheap grace in this idea or in this way is when attacks the church that do not place enough expectation on people and the struggle that they should go through to be a good Christian. So cheap grace is when you go to Christianity and it is easy. So cheap grace is when it's just part of your life and it's an easy part of your life. He says, no, this is cheap. It should sacrifice. It should cost you. Hence why it's the cost of discipleship. It should cost you things. It should be a struggle. It criticises that Christian living should be easy and comfortable, full of reward with little struggle. No. It should involve struggle. It should involve sacrifice. Bonhoeffer criticises those that say, oh, well, Jesus died for everybody and that God's grace is given out to everyone freely. No. We have to suffer like Christ did. Not that Christ died for everyone and therefore we get an easy pass. So on the other side you have costly grace. This is the grace that is the treasure hidden in a field. The idea that you would gladly sacrifice everything for this hidden treasure. Grace is costly because it calls us to follow Jesus, and that means making changes to our lives and our decisions. It is costly because it costs man his life, and it literally did to Bonhoeffer as well. And it is grace because it gives a man the only true life. So basically you have to give up your life and it will be worth it. So it's costly because you've got to give up your life, but it's grace because it will be worth it, because it's the only true life you can lead. What's that, Jade?
Sounds like terrorism.
Yeah, sounds like terrorism. Yeah.
Give up your life, but it's worth it.
Yeah, give up your life, it's worth it. Yeah, exactly. Hence the very dangerous ideology that he was saying and promoting. And hence the one man's freedom fighter to the man's terrorist. We can see in what Bonhoeffer was saying that he had some of the right elements, but then again, isn't that what terrorism says as well? Yeah. Bonhoeffer did come up last year in the AS exam. That doesn't mean it might not come up again for you. So it might still come up again, and they probably will pick one of the areas specifically for you to discuss. But as I said, even if it's God's grace, you can bring in the discipleship and the obedience and the solidarity and the background behind it. You just link everything back to the question. But this is a really good one because you can evaluate it. You can really bring in, as well if you've studied history, bring in your history knowledge. Excellent. Final slide, final box, solidarity. The purpose of Christian life is not to be religious, but rather to being in a relationship with God through living an existence for others. For Bonhoeffer, this conviction of being with and for others led to a decision that only 21 days after arriving in America and to safety, he returned to Berlin. He was determined to share in the time of suffering with the German people, to show that solidarity. Solidarity, they are together. That sharing of suffering included his decision to get involved with the resistance, including passing on information to the Allies, smuggling Jews to safety into Switzerland under the guise of being a member of the German military, all thanks to his brother. So Bonhoeffer's brother helped give him information, helped him get people out of Germany. But this was all under his brother saying, and then I'll get you out too. Got his brother out, got Bonhoeffer out of Germany into America, and then Bonhoeffer thought, nah, I need to go back to be with the people of Germany. I need to go back to suffering with them, to being in solidarity with them. And because of that decision, this led to his eventual arrest by the Gestapo and his extermination in one of the camps. So this could be seen as a shift from the church and religion to social action. And when we do Person of Jesus, you'll be able to see how Jesus has liberated, Jesus as social and political and religious revolutionary. You can very much see the links between Bonhoeffer's and his actions to Jesus. Jesus suffered and died for what he believed in. Jesus pushed against the Pharisees and the scribes and the people in command and control, and was killed because of it. Jesus was killed alongside bandits, people that were known for civic crimes, not religious ones, just the same as Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer pushed back against Hitler, and because of this, was killed for it. Discipleship, obedience, grace, solidarity are the 4 themes you must remember. Does anyone have any questions about this one? Excellent work today. Very well done, everyone.